Forces Museum at Camp Shelby. And joining us now is Dr. Andrew Wiest, a USM History Professor and guest speaker for the Memorial Day ceremonies here today at the Armed Forces Museum. Dr. Wiest, thanks for joining us on MidDays.
Oh, thank you, and thanks for leading in with Kiss, too. They were always my favorite band growing up.
Okay, so I read in your bio that you're a drummer, so we're kindred spirits in that respect. And on your USM bio, it describes you as sings badly.
Yes.
Really? You sing badly?
All drummers sing badly, I think,
That's right.
except for Levon Helms and Don Henley.
That's true. Well, I'm a big Journey fan, so Dean Castronovo is actually a pretty good vocalist as well.
True.
Now playing the drums in Journey. So in the band, the Mississippi Tornadoes.
Yes, sir.
What kind of music do you play?
It'd be good old throwback rock and roll and blues.
Okay, awesome. I bet you don't sing badly.
No,
I'm not buying that.
I try to keep up.
You must play the drums well because it says plays the drums and sings badly, so I'm assuming that means you play the drums well. That's awesome. But we are glad to have you. So
Thank you.
What was the message during the ceremony this morning?
My message was, because I am blessed to teach about military history and to write about it as well, and for those people who read and consume the history of war, whether they see it in a documentary or read it in a book, it's so easy to get swept up in the majesty of some of these world-shaking events.
Yeah.
And to try to humanize that and bring it down to the individual level. These were 19-year-old men and women, 20-year-old men and women. And in the case of Memorial Day, we're talking about men and women who never returned from those foreign fields, and to try to make their lives make some kind of sense. In the books I've written and am writing, I've had to tell the stories of many young men who did not return from war. And to get to their story, since they can't tell it themselves, you have to interview their family members. And that's when it dawned on me that Memorial Day isn't a cross. It's not a Monday on a sunny day with a barbecue. Memorial Day for many families is every day. The loved one they sent overseas didn't come back, and they have to wrestle with that every day.
Yeah. You've written 17 books.
Yes.
So what inspired you, Dr. Wiest, to start, I guess, researching and writing about war in America?
When I was young, I mentioned I liked the band Kiss. But the other thing I did, there were different classes of people in high school. There were the football players and the band nerds and stuff. I was a different kind of nerd. I was a military history nerd. I read books about war. War just fascinated me because history is hard to understand, but wars seem to show you those moments, whether it's MacArthur in the Philippines or Napoleon at Austerlitz, where everything hung in the balance just in that moment. And that was so attractive to me that I wanted to learn more about war and how it functioned. And as I began to write more and more about war, it dawned on me that the thing we're not talking about is the 19-year-old humans who were doing it.
Yeah.
That war needed to be humanized, or actually war can be too interesting. War can be too fun to read about. We need to remember what it does to people.
Yeah. And you've written a lot about Vietnam.
Yes.
And one book in particular, a bestseller, The Boys of 67.
Yes. In teaching about the Vietnam War, the first...
You have a course that you teach
sure
on,
do,
right?
Sure
yeah,
do.
I saw that. That's incredible. I didn't even know such existed in the college environment, a course specifically on Vietnam, the Vietnam War.
Right. When I was a student, nobody taught the Vietnam War. So what I studied was World War I, because everybody studied World War II, so I didn't gravitate that way. And when I started teaching at USM, it dawned on me that nobody was teaching about Vietnam, so I volunteered to do it. And it's a war that I remember on television. I wasn't old enough for it, but my sister's friends were old enough for it. And I only understood Vietnam the way you see it on television, an overly politicized event that people like to argue about. And then when I began to teach my Vietnam War class, it dawned on me that unlike my World War I class, I could have veterans come in and tell me what it was really like. And when I got to know those veterans, it kind of dawned on me that in the huge discussions about the Vietnam War, nobody was talking about these humans, these people who were civilians one day, drafted the next, and went off and did the toughest job the country ever had to offer anybody. And so that's why I wanted to write specifically about those guys, because if you're on one side of the fence, the Vietnam veterans are bad guys. If you're on the other side of the fence, they're untouchable. But what are they really? They're really scared 19-year-olds who'd much rather be at home listening to the Beatles, but they didn't have that luxury. So I wanted to write about their humanity.
And 55,000, right, didn't make it back.
Yes, of the unit I write about, they went to war with 160 men. 26 of them were killed and 105 were wounded. So pretty much everybody was killed or wounded in the year that they were there.
Unbelievable. So how did you do the research for that?
I went to the veterans themselves. It's pretty easy to write a book about, again, how Robert E. Lee probably shouldn't have done the frontal assault at Gettysburg. It would have been better to circle around behind him, perhaps. Those kinds of things are kind of easy to write about. The documents are there. It's easy to go find them. If you're writing about the soul of warfare, you have to go to the veterans themselves. So of those surviving veterans of that unit, I interviewed 70 of them and about 30 other family members as well, because that's the only way you're going to find out what really happened, is talk to the fellows who did it.
Will they talk about it openly? Will they get into the details?
It took a second. I had formed a very close relationship with one of the veterans in the unit who came to speak to my class, and because these guys are very suspicious of.
Sure.
You got to remember, college kids spit on them when they came home, so they're suspicious of college
Called them
kids.
Baby killers and all that stuff.
So they had a healthy suspicion of me, but I started going to their reunions. I started buying them drinks. That's always a smart thing to do at a reunion, and kind of got them to warm up. And then they adopted me as part of the family. Once I proved to them I wasn't out to historically harm them, that I was out to historically rescue them, then it became clear that they were. Once you got past that first talk, it was an avalanche. These guys hadn't talked about their war experience in 30 years, and to finally find somebody who cared about it, once the dam broke, it just flooded.
Get emotional?
Very.
Have to.
Because, again, these guys were, the way that I like to put it about the Vietnam generation, that these guys did as difficult a thing as any American veteran has ever done. But every other American veteran had been welcomed home with a pat on the back.
Right.
And the way my closest veteran friend, John Young, said was that we went off and sinned in the name of our nation. Killing is one of the top 10 things you're not supposed to do. And they had gone off and done it. And he said every other generation, when they got home, had been absolved of their sins, had been given a national baptism. The Vietnam generation had never had that. So when it became apparent that they were able to unburden themselves after 30 years, it again was a torrent of emotion on their part.
What's the reaction in the classroom when you're teaching about Vietnam? Obviously to kids that weren't around then.
Wow, to them it's ancient history.
Yeah.
To folks with gray hair, it seems like a current event, but we are so far from the Vietnam War now that students just don't get it. I was closer in age to World War II than these kids are in age. My freshmen were not born yet when the Twin Towers went down. So to these students, Vietnam is probably something their history class never got to, because and B, it's so old they can't understand it.
Unbelievable.
So the reaction is mystification on their part, but when they hear from the humans who were there doing it, that carries a universal element that all students can get.
Well,
Because,
thank you
again,
for
these
writing
guys were
about
their
it.
age.
Yeah, exactly. At the time. Thank you for writing about it and keeping the memory alive. I, like you, grew up in the era. I saw it unfold on television. It's just surreal now that was actually happening, and we were watching that. It's the first war ever, right, to be so-called televised. And I talked about it earlier, you get the KIA and the MIA counts every single day, and you only had 3 30-minute news broadcasts. That was it. That's how you got your news. But appreciate it, Dr. Wiest. I really enjoyed talking to you, and thanks again for your work to highlight what happened in our military history.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor.
You got it. Dr. Andrew Wiest, USM History Professor, guest speaker today for the Memorial Day ceremony at the Armed Forces Museum, has been our guest. We're stepping aside for a break. Tommy Lofton, the director of the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum.